joined by Brittany Martinez and David McEwen and previewing the vice presidential debate. We've had a couple previews already, but we're going to have a few more as we look into this debate. It's something that I think folks are watching particularly closely in the Central Valley for a number of reasons. We spoke to a few people today about their interest in the economy in particular for one of these issues. I mean, is that the biggest issue that you're hearing about, Brittany? I mean, from candidates and from folks across the country that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I think economy is always the number one issue. The second one we're seeing at the top this year is immigration in our southern border. But economy, I mean, people are worried about being able to feed their families, keep the lights on, pay for gas. And a lot of that is able to roll into that aspect is the economy. How much money do I have get to keep home? Get to take home from my paycheck. And I'm sure that's going to still be the number one issue voters worry about at the ballot box in November.
And we keep seeing the economy float up as the number one issue, and we see even other issues around the economy. So if we're talking about immigration, what does that look like relative to jobs, for example, in the construction industry and the building industry, that particularly important in California in the Central Valley. But even when Democrats talk about the politics of reproductive health care and the politics of abortion, they try to wrap that around issues about access to health care, about what's happening within the home. And so the degree to which both J.D. Vance and Walz go back and forth with each other, tying everything into the economy, I think will be an important barometer. That immigration issue is hitting kind of second, and then third or fourth, depending on gender. The gender gap is the biggest we've ever seen. It keeps growing, but at the same time, we also see some differences going on in terms of the vice president lagging with certain demographics that Joe Biden did better with in 2020. That's keeping this race close, and therefore we do expect the economy to dominate tomorrow night's debate.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, going back to it, it's like, okay, if the economy is the biggest issue, then you go and you ask the candidates their specifics and their particular plans, and you don't really get the answer that most people would be wanting to hear. Is that more expected, though, in this vice presidential debate than we did in the presidential debate? Because we're seeing a couple people that, okay, they're used to having to do the explaining for the other candidate. Is there going to be a policy that follows along with it, and we're going to actually have a policy debate as opposed to, of course, what we saw a couple weeks ago?
I think at this point, we're getting what we're getting. And I don't think what we're getting is a policy debate, because normally that'd be coming probably from the presidential candidate anyway, right? When we saw the debate a few weeks ago, they were both asked extensively about plans, but it was Trump who had sort of a funny line. He's like, "Oh, I have a plan that I'm working on," but didn't say what that plan was. You can make the same argument for VP Harris too. But no, I don't think they're really gonna. I think tomorrow is going to be a debate about who do you like more and who do you think has better character and who would you like to have a beer with. I don't know that they're going to get too heavy into the policy area, and who knows if we're going to have another presidential. So we might just be stuck wondering what's going to happen and thinking about what did Trump do during his time versus what the Biden-Harris administration has done these last 3.5 years.
Yeah, there are some important kind of elements here. It's the debate about the debates and whether or not we have another debate, as Brittany mentioned there. It doesn't look like there's even enough time for that to materialize. Given that dynamic, the focus on the economy, the focus on the culture war and what's happening with pets in Springfield, or what's happening at the border in terms of immigration, in terms of what's happening with crime, that has obviously a direct tie back to California and to the Bay Area, for example, for Kamala Harris. All of that sets kind of themes, if you will, for the debate, as opposed to actual specifics related to economic plans. So the degree to which zingers can be, slung at one candidate or another, that will be something to watch. I also think, this is J.D. Vance's moment. We haven't seen him with this level of exposure, if you will, and this number of eyeballs. And Governor Walz has been all over in terms of helping the vice president in those Rust Belt states. But we do know one thing about what a vice president does. They bring about 2 points, a little more than 2 points to the home state in terms of a bump. Now, in Ohio, that could be helpful in terms of down ballot, like Sherrod Brown for reelection for the Democrats for U.S. Senate. But for Walz, that may be helpful in a state that spills over to like Wisconsin, where Democrats usually overpoll in Wisconsin. Joe Biden was ahead in that state, apparently, by the polling average of almost 11 points in 2020. He won by less than 1 point. So that's something to pay attention to in terms of the zingers and what they're getting off, because what they're sending forward, if you will, is an element that may be thematically helpful, if not specifics that voters are looking for.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that people are looking for here in the Central Valley as well is related to oil and energy. And even though California may not have the biggest say as far as the electoral advantage in necessarily the presidential figure, it does in the sense that the House is very important. And of course, people are looking into House and oil policies. And I think they're paying attention a little bit to the debate on fracking because it's not the same thing, but they're looking at how the candidates answer those questions, and it has an impact here on Central Valley voters as well. I know when we talked before, we thought that maybe the vice presidential debate, or excuse me, the presidential debate with VP Harris was one of the bigger things that could swing voters towards Democrats in the Central Valley. Has that evaporated since, as we've seen Pennsylvania polling starting to go back towards Trump? That's for anybody, anyone who wants that fantastic word salad of a question. The reason I ask is because the balance of power is still in the House too, because we're still at 222 to 213 or something of that sort right now too, and this could swing either way. And the Central Valley has 4 or 5 seats, which are somewhere within that margin of error where people can really make a good move.
Yeah, I mean, California is going to be so important. New York is going to be so important when it comes to being able for Republicans to keep the House, or if Democrats are able to flip it this time around. Which, to be honest, is like kind of unheard of to be able to flip it so quickly. We did it in 4 years, and that was it 4 years? Oh my goodness, yeah, we did that in 4 years, and that was still sort of a task in itself and impressive on its own. So if they're able to do that this time around, I mean, that is just so telling about where the electorate is and where we are in our society when it comes to politics. I think surely, when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
fracking and oil, I think Republicans, especially when it comes to Central Valley, like we're the ones who are sort of the people who are leading on this issue and kind of really bring that point back home. Obviously, the vice president has taken a stance that she's not actually anti-fracking at all. Is she? Is she not? Who knows? But it's obviously something that's out in the discourse now. I think that when we look at tomorrow, though, something that I was reading beforehand, and sorry if I'm getting ahead on any questions here, but it was that Walz was saying he was so nervous about tomorrow and that he's not a good debater, and that like 12 of his top aides have said like, oh, he's so nervous, so nervous. I think that they are trying to shift the messaging now so that they lower expectations and that he does very well because he probably is a good debater because he is a politician or to an extent. And I think that they're trying to set the scene so that when he does do well or is able to overcome those expectations, it looks like he's the winner. But when it comes to oil and gas, I don't know. Republicans, I think we're the ones who've got the talking points here.
So if you look at also just Pennsylvania, right, you've got these two counties that really are the key barometers: Erie County, Pennsylvania, and Northampton County. The opposite ends of the state. You've got Northampton just nearby in Philadelphia, but then Erie County up on the lake. That is such a barometer for what's going on and issues in between, if you will, between north and south, east and west, in those areas of Pennsylvania are about fracking and about oil and gas and energy security. And Democrats do have to have a message about that because that also plays in other states. And where they could have a message and an opening, especially since they have a lot of resources, is at the county level. Democrats spent a lot of time in 2016 about the issues of fracking and spent tons of money in places like Iowa and the Dakotas in North and South Dakota where fracking was going on. But they did this statewide. If you look at this county by county and you treat the Central Valley, for example, this way, that allows you to build that message down into key counties and swing districts, those districts that we know where the House is going to be won or lost. And that works whether it's in California or in some of those Midwestern states because of the reliance that you see going on just between, as B mentioned, in terms of New York seats and in terms of California seats to swing the issue. So therefore, as you kind of look at this and do it piece by piece, there are only about 15 to 20 counties that we're talking about that really matter. And the fracking issue can hit in some of those key counties, particularly in a swing state like Pennsylvania.
And just to highlight, I mean, the importance, I know we were talking of the House of Representatives too. I mean, both for the first Trump terms and then also for the first Trump term and then for the Biden term, there was both chambers were also in favor of that particular party for Republicans, for Trump, and both the House and the Senate. And then, of course, for Biden, the two Democrat chambers as well. And you saw some, especially with the Biden administration, which will be coming up in debates with VP Harris if there's, or excuse me, if there's still any thing left to litigate as far as the debate would be concerned there. you'd imagine a lot of the policy that comes out of there, like the infrastructure deal and the Inflation Reduction Act, that gets talked about a lot, and maybe are the repercussions that we get to see back for this debate, or the ones that perhaps boost some people to vote for that particular person as well. So that's the importance of course, winning those chambers and not just, legislating from the top down. It's something interesting to note too, as Brittany was talking about jumping the gun for a question. That was going to be my next thing. This seems to be the first time you can make the argument since Biden and Palin, where you have really distinct and interesting personalities that are coming out both at the same time for the VP debate. You can say Biden continued into 2012 with his smile fest against Paul Ryan and the laughing that he was doing, and it had a lot of character. 2016 was much more toned down with Kaine and Pence, and VP Harris was very, measured in her debate against Pence, and Pence remained measured in that as well. This seems to be something where, okay, you have really two interesting, bombastic personalities that will be featured in this. One who might be a nervous wreck, but of course also could end up being a nervous sensation, I'm sure some Democrats would say. What role do you think that those guys have as far as their personalities concerned in this, Brittany?
Well, when I think of Vance, I think he's got a lot to prove here. Apparently, allegedly he's supposed to be this incredible orator, but we haven't seen that on the campaign trail. He's just made gaffe after gaffe after gaffe, from the childless cat ladies to, saying that the grandparents should be taking care of the grandkids, and like that's their purpose, and all of these things that maybe in context make sense, but are just crass comments more likely than not that he was just saying to be funny, at least when it comes to the cat lady thing. So I think he's got a lot to prove here as far as how likable he is. And apparently he's supposed to be likable, right? Like hillbilly elegy. Not eulogy, elegy, hillbilly. Not a
that's if they lose the election.
Tomorrow, but
yeah.
yeah, and so I'm very interested to see. We're on the flip side. We have Walz, who's still fairly unknown, but he's been able to sort of muster up this personality of being like America's dad, right? We recall Gus during his speech. It was just such a sweet moment. He was getting so emotional. But does he have the debating chops? Apparently his camp says no, but I feel like that is just a tactic, like I said earlier, to make us think that he's not going to perform well and then to exceed our expectations. So there's a lot on the line tomorrow. I'm really interested to see tomorrow's debate because I can imagine them both being pretty fiery personalities. And I think the one who's able to remain measured, as you were talking about, but still come across with some oomph, is going to be the one to be successful.
Yeah, there's some interesting elements just per the timing of this debate, not just in terms of getting more exposure for each of these individuals, who they are and how they perform, right? Does J.D. Vance pass that likability test? And is Coach Walz the coach, or is he someone who can perform on the national stage and gives the appearance of being able to step into the Oval Office if needed? That's a critical test. But if there are issues that come up relative to beyond the economy, the pocketbook, and immigration, and beyond crime, and we push overseas, we look at what's happening in terms of the Middle East, or what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, and we start to look at some of these really hard, serious issues on foreign policy. How do these two perform? Does J.D. Vance revert to his discussions of service in the military and overseas? Does that provide him a moment of contrast with Governor Walz or not? And then does Governor Walz, what does he do about the serious approach and the challenges for United States foreign and security policy overseas, and what comes next in those questions? Can they elevate that conversation, or do they run with their shtick? Because right now, so far, their shtick has been, the parodies are Saturday Night Live like. They're not about seriousness on these very hard issues that don't have good answers. How do they handle those really serious questions when they move forward, when they get out of their comfort zone, which might be about the culture war of the pocketbook, and then where do they go? I think that'll be something to watch as well during the debate.
That's always the question, though, with governors in particular is, okay, what's the experience with foreign policy? And then the question for senators is always, okay, what's the relatability outside your state to the rest of the country? And how can you tie that back in? Just a few other things I want to talk about. It seems like this debate is interesting because you have Vance, who's known as kind of the Trump explainer, as far as the ability to try to break down Trump's conversations into, or I should say side conversations into a policy and try to defend him. And that's what he's probably best at doing, it seems like, from his interviews that he's done so far, versus Walz is more the people person, right? And then that's the question about how he does in the debate, is because he's so his ability is really to go face to face with the people that he's talking to, the people that he governs, and the people that he's reaching out to, because that's just the type of personality that he is. I think those are kind of the two strong suits for each. Then it'll be interesting to see, okay, what's lacking in the other areas, and we'll find that out tomorrow night. And the other thing I wanted to get into too on this is VP debates historically, they don't matter. Does this one matter as far as a result is concerned? Are we going to see polls shift one way or the other depending on what happens, depending if there's a fly that sticks in somebody's hair? Professor, what are your thoughts?
Well, look, there will be that moment, I think, that we'll point to in this debate, one way or another, that moves the needle just a little bit. The undecided vote that we look at is so small that there's a subset of voters that's looking for something, and are they looking for a push one way or another? So does it move the needle? And what we see is a moving of the needle after the presidential debate towards Harris, but it's still not a gap that she needs amongst likely voters in swing states. We see that needle come back a little bit after the second attempted assassination against Donald Trump, moving this race closer still. So you're talking about something that's half point, 1 point. Is it sustained? Well, if Harris is at 3 or 4 points, she needs to be at 5 points in those swing states like Pennsylvania and in Georgia to have a shot. She's not quite there. So in that sense, on the margins, maybe a small move depending where the fly lands during the debate.
As we know, this is already going to be a tight race. Every little point counts, every little inch counts, and everyone is, I think, trying to fight for that inch. That was something that Nikki Haley used to say on the campaign trail, fighting for that inch. And this is probably going to be Americans' last chance to see a debate for this cycle, because we don't know whether there's going to be a presidential one. So I do think that maybe more folks than normal are going to be tuning in. We'll see what those numbers actually look like at the end of the day. But other than catching, some rallies here or there, or maybe one of them will do a town hall or something, this is sort of your last chance to see what is this administration going to be about. So though traditionally perhaps it doesn't move the needle all that much, I do think in a race like this, also it's 2024, like weird things have been happening. I think that it will matter, even if it's just that inch, but that inch counts.
Yeah, well, just a point. I mean, the presidential debate had a viewership of about 67 million and another 14 or 15 million online. All right. That was the first week of Monday Night Football. Monday Night Football had 25 million people watching the NFL. You had 3 times that number watching the presidential debate. So I think B is on to something here. There's going to be a big eyeball set on the vice presidential debate that normally wouldn't be there. And there's precedent for this, even though this race is really close. And even with, if you will, the football season kind of moving into the fourth, fifth week here.
And I think last couple questions here, but the interesting things you're watching for in this debate too are how many times does weird get thrown around? How many times does the childless cat lady get thrown around? How many times do cats get thrown around just in general? Just interesting things to watch for as far as the viral moments are concerned. Is it going to be a brat debate? Brittany's got the color on right now that maybe suggests that it could be.
Oh no.
You too. Yeah, the brat.
But those will be interesting things to watch. What are Kern County voters? What should they be taking away? We spoke with a couple today, or a few today. It seems like the big ones are economy, immigration, and energy production. And specifically with the economy, one of the people that we spoke with talked about, concern that her grandkids are not going to have enough money to buy a home. The only way that they're going to get it is if it's her home that she then passes down to them. I mean, it really does seem, as we started the conversation with on the economy, that's the biggest thing Kern County voters are looking for. But what in particular in these congressional districts through the Central Valley should folks be aware of and looking for, Brittany?
No, I think that you're right when it comes to being able to purchase a home. I know that I'm at an age where I guess my parents probably had a home by now, and I rent very expensively. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be top of mind. In the Central Valley, always water, always drought, always energy, agriculture. Those are the things that we care about. Is that going to be spoken about on the debate stage? Like, I don't really imagine them getting into agriculture that much, but sure, when it comes to the economy and who has a better plan, I think people will be tuning in. And to your point about all the weird things that are happening, I can't wait to find some viral bingo card on Twitter or something, and then, just play that at home and see. But I'm sure not brat, but I'm sure the animals are going to come up weird and, childless cat lady or something. We already know that they're preparing for it. They are prepared and have those posts ready to go as soon as it's able to get brought up. Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the interesting things out of a vice presidential debate may be the memes that are created by Wednesday, and whether they're about elegy or eulogy, as an
Yeah,
example. That might be
maybe I should
interesting.
write that meme.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, it's totally right there, of course. I think also this element of when they're talking about does global climate change come up? Does environment come up? How is that related to gas prices? And how is that related, for example, to water or ag, especially in light of the Hurricane Helene and the tropical storm that followed and the disaster recovery, what that looks like. So how do you relate all of that into a worldview and a quality of life? And does that hit those individuals, for example, in Kern County? How do they see that when it comes down to their pocketbook and their family? And the last part, is there demographic narrowcasting? Is anyone speaking to 18 to 34-year-old voters? Is there any element there that moves to the brat, if you will, and then targets those voters who have a different set of circumstances there because they're concerned about their future and the affordability of the American dream moving forward?
Yeah, and the last question I had is somewhat related to what you were just talking about, which is what are those things? What is that last breaking thing that happens? It's just something that pops into the news cycle and maybe changes someone's vote as we get closer to. And of course, I'm asking you this question a month before we start voting, so there's plenty of time. But you get stuff that's unpredictable like Helene, and you wonder, okay, that's barreling through swing states. I mean, what? How important is the disaster response there? And then on top of that, what is something else that can drop? Could something drop? Like a Comey bomb towards the end of the cycle too. I mean, we have a presidential candidate who still has some court cases that he's going through right now, a former president who is the top candidate for the Republican ticket that's going through those court cases. There's whether or not Biden on the campaign trail will say some things. I know that Republicans were just jumping on that View interview from last week too. What are some little things that people should be paying attention to, or perhaps an issue as well that may be a sleeper issue going into that final week? I'll ask for one from each of you.
Well, sure. I think disaster response is going to be really important here. There's always the opportunity for the October surprise, but I can't tell you what that is because it's a surprise. But I will say we just saw something happen with Mark Robinson in North Carolina, right? So people are sitting on that opposition research. They're waiting for the right time to drop it. I wouldn't be surprised if there was stuff that came out of either of those camps. And you know what? I could see something like gun control in this last couple of weeks being something being pushed by both sides.
Yeah, I think that what's not in the fancy mathematical models that we run as pointy-headed academics are related to things like a mass shooting, right? This moved the needle for young people in Parkland in a midterm, 2018. Dobbs decision, abortion, moves the needle for those young people again in 2022. Again, both midterms, but nonetheless, events like that that can occur and upset, if you will, the trajectory of this race could be absolutely critical, especially if the race is basically dead even at parity, but parity at 48-48, not quite, if you will, at 50-50. That'll be something to watch for either, I think, of those emotional hot button issues, especially the last couple of weeks.
It's so interesting because I think back to 8 years ago in 2016, where it was there's just not enough people went to the polls. That would be the argument from the Democrats. It's just in terms of the outlook of what happened. Now, of course, way back then, a lot of the thought was Clinton has this, she'll run away with it, all that sort of stuff. This time around, it seems the opposite. It seems similar, but the opposite. In the fact that, okay, there seems like there's going to be a lot of engagement. You can cite the debate numbers of how many people watch the debate. We can cite increases in voter registration. We can cite increases in issues around that are really important sticking points because it seems like, okay, yeah, economy is the biggest thing, but a lot of voters are going to go to the polls based on what's going on in the Middle East. A lot of people are going to go to the polls for the energy costs, for their industry, if there's policy that they feel is going to impact their day-to-day lives and their jobs. And it's really difficult to predict right now. Okay, what's the number one driving factor? Yeah, it seems the economy, but it's not by such a wide margin. And it's not just so nuanced as the economy. It's what we were saying earlier. It's can my grandkids afford a house? For somebody else, it's going to be, I can't afford to make my daily commute. It's just these little things that'll be very fascinating to pay attention to as we head down the wire. And we'll have both of you with us as it heads down the wire for as long as we can keep you guys for. So we appreciate it a lot. KBAK-CBS. It's going to be the home of the VP debate tomorrow night. So we're looking forward to that as well. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a total pleasure. I always like being on with B.
Absolutely.